background information that saves me having to cover that within this talk. So I'm going to talk about the role of water conservation in Ireland, and this draws from two pieces of research that I did on Forum Uisce on domestic and non-domestic water conservation. And that research was done prior to the Water and Environment Abstractions and Associated Impoundments Act that came into force in August of 2024, as well as the change to the Planning and the Development Bill, which passed through the Dáil in October 2024. There is a growing disparity between the demand for water and the available supply across Europe, and Ireland is no exception to that. So today we're going to have a little look at what can be done to address that. So Ireland's water resources are under pressure, and we heard from Conor just how climate change impacts, particularly in terms of changes in precipitation, are going to affect Ireland's water resources. But there are also changes from population growth and also a legacy of underinvestment in infrastructure. And on top of that, there are many competing demands, competing end users for that supply. So that's household, it's public services, it's agriculture and industry. And Ireland has a really diverse industrial sector, pharmaceuticals, energy companies, data centres, as well as things like manufacturing. And lots of these are quite big users of water. They maybe need it in large quantities, or they need it at a higher quality than would normally be supplied in the potable supply. So we need to think about how we are managing that, and also the regional imbalance in that as well. So if we look at data centres, for example, there are currently 82 data centres in Ireland, and there's planning permission for another 40. The majority of those are located within the Eastern and Midlands region, which you can see on this figure has the largest supply-demand deficit in the country. So there is real need to think about the implication cumulatively at a catchment scale of future demands on water resources and their location within a catchment. So if we take one of the data centres, one of the metadata centres, in 2022 alone, it used around 1 million metres cubed of water a year, which is around 2.5 megalitres a day. So Uisce Éireann carried out some supply-demand balances in their National Water Resources Plan, which was carried out in 2019. And essentially what that does is it looks at the water available for use relative to the demand for water. And they consider that in 4 different planning scenarios, which consider different weather events. So there would be a normal year where there are typically average weather conditions. There would be a dry year where there may be below average rainfall, but not necessarily any constraints on demand. There would be a dry year where there may be a summer drought, and there would be a freeze-thaw instance in winter where perhaps high demand is driven by leakages from burst pipes due to the cold temperatures. What we can see in a normal year is that there is a supply-demand balance deficit in 20 of the 26 counties and the Greater Dublin area, and that this supply-demand balance is projected to worsen in almost all of those counties by 2044, which was the horizon that Uisce Éireann were looking at in that National Water Resources Plan, and that's likely to be exacerbated by climate change impacts and changes to that normal year with typical weather conditions as well. So these supply-demand balances are calculated for each water resource zone, but that was done prior to the implementation of the new abstraction regulations. And this new regulation could increase the supply-demand deficits by reducing the amount of water that can be extracted from sources by Uisce Éireann. So if we look at that, we can see again there's regional variation in that. The analysis that was done in 2019 in the National Water Resources Plan showed that there was around 1,227 megalitres per day available for supply in the Eastern and Midlands region, and the projections are that that could decrease by around 30% to 867 megalitres per day. And we can see that an even higher decrease is projected due to these changes in legislation in the northwest. Most of the growth and development plans are relying on leakage reduction. But this alone is not going to solve all of those supply-demand balance deficits. So as Connor mentioned, there are competing and conflicting interests sometimes. There is a need for economic growth, but we also have to balance that with environmental protection. So if we look at the work that leakage reduction has achieved, particularly in the National Leakage Reduction Programme, there's been substantial leakage reduction. If you look in the Northwest, it's reduced from 46% at the 2019 baseline. If we look in the Southwest, that baseline was around 48%. But if we actually dive into the numbers and look at what those projections were prior to the abstraction legislation, there was a sustainable economic level of leakage target of 24%. But if we factor in that reduction in water available for use because of the abstraction legislation changes, along with projections of population growth, in the Southwest region, population growth is expected to increase domestic demand by around 33%. Non-domestic demand is expected to increase by about 4%. And then coupled with that, we've got a 26% decrease in water available for use because of the abstraction legislation changes. That would mean that if we were to balance that water available, leakage targets would need to be around 17% rather than 24%. So at the minute, with those changes to abstraction legislation, it's a little bit unclear of how that supply-demand balance will be addressed based on the current leakage targets. And there is more that needs to be done here. And that's why today I'm arguing for the case of water conservation, that it is seen as a tool that can be used to complement infrastructure upgrades and investment. So water conservation is often seen as something that an individual can do, whether that's taking shorter showers, whether it's using rainwater harvesting, having a low flush toilet, or something that the water utility can do in terms of reducing leakage. But today I want to argue the case that it should be viewed as a climate adaptation tool and that it can be used alongside capital investment for infrastructure upgrades, not instead of, or not that the focus is entirely on those infrastructure upgrades alone. It has the potential to be much more effective if it is applied by national government and local government and within businesses and by private individuals to reduce their own consumption. The reason why it's not implemented enough currently is because there are no mandatory measures or mandatory requirements to implement them. So on top of that, we need to think about the education and the understanding of a need to value water conservation and water as a resource. Another reason why it should be viewed as a climate action tool is because there are societal, environmental and economic benefits to using and wasting less water. So 19% of the energy in Irish homes is used for heating water. So saving energy saves saving water saves energy and saves money on bills as well. In an Oireachtas debate in 2021, one of the contributors to that said that one of the greatest barriers to increasing housing supply is a lack of water and wastewater treatment infrastructure. And therefore, there's a real need to start to think about using less water in order to be able to meet those future growth and development plans. And finally, from a climate perspective, there was a study by Waterwise that found that a 20% reduction in water could save up to around 0.5 kilogram of carbon dioxide emission per property per day. And that if the reduction could be brought down from, say, 130 litres down to 80 litres per person per day, and that could save a third of all water-related carbon emissions. So what can be done at a national level? First of all, there needs to be buy-in. It needs to be included in Irish government policy. And one of the things that I'm proud to have achieved with On Fórum Uisce is that we have a commitment from the outgoing government in the Water Services Policy Statement that a national conservation working group will be established to advise the Minister on a strategy for water conservation, and that incentivised and mandated measures will be considered. And they may include things like a government-led water label, updated building regulations that prioritise both efficient new homes and buildings, and that they're efficient in terms of water and energy use, as well as things from a planning perspective for non-domestic water conservation, that they would think about the transparency in water use for planning applications considering a whole catchment approach. There can be a lot more that can be done in terms of climate action plans, including water efficiency in the retrofit of public buildings and considering water efficiency in all public procurements that are using public funds. And at a local authority level, there are actions that could be implemented to increase water efficiency and water conservation in public housing and public buildings, but this is going to require training of plumbing and building contractors on water-saving technologies and awareness around why they're important. And finally, I think local authorities could also look to include actions to facilitate sustainable water management during the planning process, considering the climate change impacts on water availability at a catchment level and thinking about the cumulative impact of multiple water users within that space. And this is going to require training for planning staff on water availability and impacts of abstraction on aquatic ecosystems. So to summarise, I'm going to echo Connor's point that sustainable water management is central to a climate-resilient island. The island water resources are under pressure, and there is regional variation in the availability, and predicted growth may be a conflicting factor that could contribute further to supply-demand deficits. Leakage reduction alone isn't going to address them, so we need to use all the tools available, and crucially, water conservation is one of those tools that is underused, and it offers multiple benefits. There are a whole suite of technical, regulatory, and educational measures that we don't have time to go into today, but the suitability for implementing those different measures should really be considered by a cross-sectoral national conservation team as part of a government strategy for water conservation, and I hope that's something that will be considered in the next DOL.